Now,
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 7:06 here on O'Connor and Company. If you've missed our first 2 hours this morning, well, my gosh, that's okay. I've got great news for you. You can just subscribe to our podcast and download it. Yeah, that thing Patrice said during our 5 o'clock hour, I'm still getting over it. I can't believe that. Why do you save all of your really risque stuff for the 5 o'clock hour? It's because kids are sleeping, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah. I'm family friendly.
I like to call the 5 o'clock hour of this program Patrice Onwuka Unplugged and Uncensored. And boy, you need to download that podcast so you can hear her let her hair down. Coming up at 8:35, Will Hild, Consumer Research. We've got high drama in the boardroom at Disney, and in this case, Bob Iger and the woke police won. But they've definitely been sent a message. We'll talk to Will Hild about that. Right now, though, we are joined by Cameron Hamilton. He has thrown his proverbial hat into the ring. Wants to be your congressman there, 7th Congressional District. It's an open seat. The 7th and the 10th and Maryland 6th are all three open seats. Open seats here in the D.C. area. All three of those seats lately have been represented by Democrats, but they have swung back and forth. A high Republican population in those three districts, so the highly competitive races this 2024 season, and may I say, rather expensive races, I should expect. Cameron Hamilton is a Navy SEAL combat veteran and also was a division director at Homeland Security. He's now running for Congress. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Hamilton, and thank you for your service.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, listen, set the stage here for the potential of this race if you were to be the nominee, because honestly, the most important thing right now that I'm looking at from the Republicans is, can you win? And, Alexander Vindman's brother, Eugene Vindman, the twin, he looks like he's going to be the Democrat nominee. He will be well-funded. And this entire thing is going to come down to which military veteran do you prefer to represent the 7th District? Why should it be you?
Well, that's a really great question. I think ultimately I've had a variety of different forms of experience. First and foremost, I live in Orange, Virginia with my family here. I was actually recruited by Nick Freitas. Nick ran in 2020. He's my current state delegate, and he's the most conservative delegate here in the Commonwealth. And I've had great partnerships. My entire federal career has been working for the U.S. taxpayer in the DOD, at the Department of State, as well as at the Department of Homeland Security. And let's say I know where the bureaucratic sickness lies within our federal government, and I know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. So that's what I'm hoping to bring. I'm running as a constitutional conservative. So it's not just that I'm a veteran, it's that I'm the right kind of veteran. I've also been radically opposed to the vaccine mandates, and I was willing to take a stand while I was a civil servant. So I'm hoping to work for the American people here, and I have the scars to prove that I've been willing to take on the good fight, even against other Republicans.
So talk to us about some of the issues specifically. What are the top 1 or 2 issues that you think are really resonating with the voters you speak to, and what are the solutions you want to put on the table?
Another great question. I think first and foremost, the biggest issue that is affecting virtually everyone across this country is the southern border. We have a national security crisis. We also have a humanitarian catastrophe on the southern border. We cannot continue as status normal. That's why I've been honored to have the endorsement of Chairman Mark Green from the Homeland Committee. Mark led the fight to impeach Mayorkas. I worked under Mayorkas. And again, I think that was a tremendous victory for the American people. So the southern border is certainly number one. Number two, the economy. We have Americans everywhere paying more for gas, more for fuel, more for the cost of energy, more for just basic everyday commodities. You don't have to be a millionaire or someone working a blue-collar trade to feel the effects of this. Everyone feels it. And it's just very difficult to say, oh, the economy's in recovery. No, it's not. We're not seeing that at the gas pump. So people are sick and tired of spending and frivolous kind of bills that are really leading towards greater inflation and reducing the spending power of the dollar. I would say the third is also people are sick and tired of the corruption and the lack of accountability of D.C. itself. I'm running as a different kind of Republican. I've been endorsed by Rand Paul, many others, Thomas Massey, and many other amazing patriots, Eli Crane, Bob Good, you name it, even Matt Gaetz. And so the point here is I think we have to get our party back on track with the basic foundations, back to the basics, if you will, so that we can then win and have a strategic victory against the progressives.
I think the Republicans have a choice between many great patriots who have served this nation, a good handful of them special operators as well, including yourself, sir. And I got to say, there has been a warped new redefinition of what a patriot is. Abigail Spanberger, the current congresswoman there from the 7th, she basically ran on the idea that to be a real patriot, all you had to do was just say no to Donald Trump and stop Donald Trump because he's a threat to our country. And I assure you, Mr. Vindman, should he get the nomination, he'll do the same thing. This entire race is going to be about Donald Trump. As much as you want to focus on those policies, and I want you to, I'd love for you to say, how are you going to combat that? Will you force the Democrat nominee to address the horrific border security problems and how it's affecting the 7th Congressional District? Or will this all just be Trump yes, Trump no?
I think so. I think it's intellectually defensible to say why we support Donald Trump. I think that if you look at the way the economy was doing, the way that the stock market was, the way many different things within our federal government were working and functioning, the way our military defense was being maneuvered, even the way that we were perceived internationally. We didn't have wars in Ukraine. We didn't have some of these overseas conflicts the manner in which we see now because of the perceived weakness. So number one, I think on the topic of Trump, I think that's easily refutable. And I think, frankly, Republicans need to stop retreating from Donald Trump. I've publicly stated my endorsement of him. And I think no matter what, I'm going to get labeled as a Trump guy. Well, guess what? I supported the president. I'd support any man over Joe Biden at this point. Number two, I do think very clearly, like you said, we need to push back against progressives and the implications of their policies. We need to connect with the American people in a real and tangible way so that they understand we're here for you. We care for your well-being. We care for the stability and peace of your family. These policies are detracting from your ability to live with prosperity and to live in peace. And so I think the notion of, well, you're a patriot if you oppose Donald Trump. No, you're a patriot if you advocate for principles that will bless the lives of the constituents here in the Virginia 7th or the constituents you represent. Yeah. That's what being a patriot is.
Mr. Hamilton, one of the ways that I find it asinine, frankly, and you brought it up earlier, the southern border, and why this border issue is an issue for every American, every state, every district. Talk to us about what you are seeing, and more specifically, the failure of the Biden administration and Democrats in Washington right now to address the southern border and really what needs to be done. You talked about working under Secretary Mayorkas. I would love to hear, what do you want to see done if you are elected, day one, happen for us to control the southern border issue?
That's a great question. And ultimately, while I worked at DHS, I actually worked specifically for the DHS Chief Medical Officer, who then reported directly to Mayorkas. So I managed the Emergency Medical Services Division, overseeing EMTs, all scattered throughout the southern border, from the Coast Guard to Border Patrol, you name it. I will say there is a common trend that when there's a crisis or a catastrophe, we need to spend more dollars and expand programs to mitigate the response. Unfortunately, the statistics show something very, very different. The more we would surge personnel to the southern border, all that we were actually doing and dealing with the problem is speeding up the manner in which we process and then transport people to the United States interior faster, therefore increasing the demand and flow. It actually has the exact opposite effect than what people think. Right now, the spending bills that we've seen going forth with DHS are increasing the budget, which, again, Border Patrol does need more assistance. There's no denying that. But the common problem here is Washington seems to think that spending more dollars and expanding programs solves problems. It doesn't. It doesn't when you have a current cabinet-level secretary that refuses to enforce the law. Not only that, he actually directed members of his team to violate the law. So I think what Congress did with Mark Green, again, who's a great friend of mine and an absolute patriot, he used Mayorkas' internal memos to impeach him. I think that's a key way that Congress will say, if you're not willing to faithfully execute the law, we owe it to the American people to remove you from office. That's one manner to do it. Number two, I actually would believe in going a different approach. I actually believe in perhaps even restricting or rescinding federal funding or putting clauses within funding to ensure that if DHS is not executing their job, we're withholding your funding until you actually do the job you're assigned. And so, using the power of the purse that Congress really has.
Well, I love the fact that Vindman could say, well, you're trying to ruin Homeland Security. And you can say, excuse me, I worked in Homeland Security. I know a thing or two about it. That's right. He made its way through BUDS. He served 4 overseas deployments with SEAL Team 8. I think the only easy day was yesterday is a pretty good motto to take with you onto the campaign trail and into Congress, too. So good luck, Cameron Hamilton. If you want more information about him, CameronHamilton.com. Thank you, sir. Appreciate talking with you.
On.
Thank you both. God bless you.
It is 7:16 now, so we'll get straight to Jamie Whitten in the Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center.
So much truth, you'll hope for traffic so you can hear it all on the Vince Colonnade Show, weekdays 3 to 6. Right.
Well, it's been quite a couple of years over at Disney. Not only did they declare war on the voters of Florida by trying to use all of their money that they make from you for watching family entertainment to try to topple Governor DeSantis and Republicans in the state legislature over the laws that were enacted to try to protect young children from sexually explicit instruction in the schoolrooms. They lost that, by the way, in a monumental way. In fact, Disney is weaker in Florida now because they picked that fight with Ron DeSantis. Disney's ability to manage in the almost authoritarian way they did the government systems and free of any oversight from the state with regard to the Walt Disney World Resort properties. They've lost that now because of that political fight that they picked. They completely got humiliated. Plus the fact that their stock is down and the ticket sales are down because you'll remember Christopher Rufo revealed this Zoom meeting where producers out of Hollywood were talking about injecting a gay agenda into their films targeting children.
Our leadership over there has been so welcoming to my not at all secret gay agenda. And so I feel like I felt like it was, maybe it was that way in the past, but I guess something must have happened in the last.
I'm more concerned about, well, not more concerned, but I'm as concerned about the fact that this is a creator and artist who's making movies who can't put a freaking sentence together without saying 107 times.
It's embarrassing.
Anyway, Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, who helped usher in that not-so-secret gay agenda into films, had an attempted shakeup of his leadership yesterday at a shareholders meeting, but he did prevail. The shareholders voted to keep the company's preferred slate of the board nominees that really was focused on keeping billionaire Nelson Peltz off the board. He purchased a bunch of stock, got himself in a position to be a board member and run for board, but it turns out, and he was saying, listen, there's no succession plan here at this company. The product that we're creating right now is offending our core audience, which is children and their parents.
Exactly.
But Bob Iger spent a huge amount of money trying to keep this guy off the board, and he did prevail yesterday in the long run.
So, it's so interesting. Remember, Disney had announced that Iger was coming back in November of 2022. They had a new successor to replace him, Bob Chapek. But he was worse. And he was out because of a bunch of missteps and clashes that he made, weakening Disney's performance, which was frankly weakening because of the kind of content that they were putting out. And so Bob Iger comes back here trying to salvage Disney, and he himself, I think he recognizes just how weak they are and the cultural missteps, how out of step with culture Disney is in trying to promote an agenda that most families do not want to see, most parents do not want to see injected.
They're so arrogant over there now, Patrice, that they don't think that they're, need to be in step with culture. They think they drive culture. They think they're the ones who are setting the agenda here. And in many cases, actually, with some of this stuff, they are successful in that. Coming up at 8:35, Will Hild of Consumers Research, who's been sounding the alarm about Disney and other corporations. He's going to join us to talk about what happened yesterday. I do want to leave you with this, though. Chloe Cole, one of the most famous detransitioners in this country. As a young girl, she was convinced as a teenager to go through radical medical procedures to change her sex to male. She then has now retransitioned, thank God, and she's become an outspoken activist. She called into the board meeting.
Good morning. I am Chloe Cole, patient advocate for Do No Harm, a group that seeks accountability in the medical profession. I am presenting proposal number 7 titled Report on Gender Transitioning Compensation and Benefits, sponsored by National Legal and Policy Center. Disney pays for gender transition interventions, but not detransitioning care. Therefore, the company discriminates based on gender identity under EEOC regulations. I speak from personal experience as someone who was deceived and physically harmed at a young age by gender ideology, validated by the medical industry and pushed to the masses by corporations like Disney. Influenced by modern media and social networks, I began to transition to male at age 12. By age 16, after practitioners I trusted encouraged me to take puberty blockers and get a double mastectomy, I tried to come back to reality, but it was too late.
She went on to tell her story, but the key part there was you're paying for people, your employees or their children to transition, but if they want to detrans, then you won't pay for that. That's discrimination. Get ready for a lawsuit, she said. And Disney will get...
Smart tactic.
We shall see what happens there.
Now,
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Hey, look at that. It's 7:36 now on O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in here. It's a pretty important Thursday morning, frankly, because Patrice Onwuka is here.
That's so kind of you to say, Larry. Good morning.
Well, I mean, it's in my contract, I have to say. But I say it with, but that doesn't mean I didn't mean it. At 8:35, Will Hild will join us, Executive Director of Consumers Research. In the meantime, though, Patrice and I'm Larry O'Connor, by the way. Thanks so much for tuning in. By the by, Charlie Kirk. Now, I like Charlie Kirk. I also disagree with Charlie Kirk a lot. You know, listen, I don't agree with anybody 100% of the time.
Well, nobody does.
Except my wife, Meredith.
Okay. Yeah. That is an important person to agree with. 100% of the time. No, just kidding.
I heard that tone. Okay.
Yes, it is important most of the time to agree with your wife, yes.
Charlie Kirk, who created Turning Point USA, which is just absolutely a powerhouse organization in terms of their money and some influence they have, especially with younger voters. It's they do quite a bit of outreach to college-age kids, etc. It's similar to what Young America's Foundation does, the group that I'm affiliated with. A little different, though. Anyway, the point is, in the model of Young America's Foundation, Charlie Kirk and other people associated with Turning Point, they often have events on college campuses. Then oftentimes Charlie will say controversial things, which, again, we embrace here. We love controversial things.
Let's push the envelope.
Right. So as we discuss what Charlie had to say, most specifically about cultural issues, relationships with men and women, marriage, things like that, a couple of things that you should bear in mind. First, Charlie is in his early 30s. I think my views on such things were probably quite different when I was in my early 30s. And so, you know, you got to give somebody some grace and understanding that they're going to grow into some various...
This is a long disclaimer.
I also, by the way, if we disagree with what Charlie has to say, and I think we do on many of these things, that doesn't mean he shouldn't be able to say it. We don't want him canceled.
Yeah, he has
we
the
don't
right.
Want it's like he says what he says, I say what I say, you say what you say, we discuss it, we disagree, and then, you know, we do tequila shots afterwards. So let's just start right with it. Here's Charlie Kirk explaining why young people should get married early, especially young women.
Young men are the most conservative they've been in 50 years. They're the most conservative in 50 years. Young ladies present a great opportunity. They are not conservative.
What do you think that is?
Well, there's a couple reasons for this. Abortion is obviously part of it, but they've been sold a lie through culture, through media, through even some of their parents that you basically have to go pursue this corporate trajectory and that men are always the problem and suppress your biological impulses. A lot of them are on birth control too, and birth control like really screws up female brains, by the way. Every single one of you need to make sure that your loved ones are not on birth control. It increases depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. Birth control is the #1 most prescribed medication for young ladies under the age of 25. They will give young ladies birth control for pimples, for acne, to control their moods, their period. It is awful. It's terrible, and it creates very angry and bitter young ladies and young women. That bitterness then manifests into a political party that is the bitter party.
So
wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, you know what, Patrice? Why don't you just take it from here, and I'll sit back and listen.
Okay. So where do we start? Where I agree. I agree that young people should be getting married earlier. I agree that young men are more conservative and young women are more liberal. I agree that young women have been sold the feminist dream of going through, pursuing your education, pursuing your career, and put men and relationships aside, and the desire for marriage and family, put that aside. And I agree that it has detrimental impacts, and I agree that I think he says a little bit further that your dating pool shrinks considerably when you hit your 30s, and it makes it more difficult.
Maybe we should get into that part of it as well,
now we'll circle back to the impact of hormones on women's brains. Go ahead.
Right. All right.
It is the least married young female generation in American history. We have more 30-something young women that are single than married. And they are by far the most reliable Democrat voting bloc, even more than black voters now. They vote 95% Democrat. If you are a 32-year-old young lady who went to college, who has a nice apartment, a corporate job, and cats, you're a Democrat voter, right? And
that's true, and I talk about this quite a bit. It's like single women, and by the way, the policies that the Democrats are putting forth and embracing are keeping women single because that's their biggest demographic voting base: single women. All right, and then there's this.
We've basically told a great generation of young women, don't get married, don't have kids, go get a corporate job, and it's created mass political hysteria. And then in their early 30s, they get really upset because they say, the boys don't want to date me anymore because they're not at their prime. And people get mad when I say that. Well, it's just true. If you're in your early 30s, I'm sorry. It's like you're not as attractive in the dating pool as you were in the early 20s. But again, you have your corporate job and cats, so I thought and I feel sorry for a lot of these young ladies. They email me all the time, and they say, Charlie, I'm broken down in tears. I'm 33. I earn $130,000 a year. I travel a lot. And I have no one to share my life with. And I hope they find somebody in time. And that's why they always frame it. They're like, I'm running out of time, I'm running out of time, I'm running out of time. It's like, well, the culture did this to you, but you also made a decision. You made a decision consciously to not date with the intent to marry. And it creates a lot of bad consequences.
There you go.
Yeah. So,
all you women in your 30s looking to get married now when you're past your prime.
That's what Don Lemon said in the context of political leaders, female political leaders, specifically Nikki Haley.
And we panned Don. Sorry.
We panned Don Lemon, for saying that. But I think the context here is different. I think Charlie Kirk is talking about women in their 30s, and I know a lot of them in their 40s who are single, professional, educated, and alone, and cry at night every night. And I think there is a really salient point that society, that our baby boomer parents drilled in our heads: get your education, get a job, then focus on marriage later in life. The interesting fact, though, is that men's stock increases with age. So as men get older, they become more dateable, more marriable. They will continue to have more options. Women, on the other hand, it's a challenge because you find fewer people to date the older you get. So it's interesting.
That stuff is true, and it is interesting. I think so. Here's the issue: if you take Charlie Kirk's words, which is all we have to take here, he would have you believe that women in their 30s who were not married are doing that because they wanted a career instead, and they just, and that's the only reason. And I can assure you, I know women who would have loved to have gotten married earlier. And the fact of the matter is the men their age were irresponsible little boys who either didn't want to get married or were, losers, right? And so they waited, not because they wished to, but because they didn't have any good options. And I don't think women should just settle and well, I've got to get married, so I'm just going to marry somebody, because that's a recipe for disaster as well.
No, but I think women also have to figure out what really matters in a partner. And there are a lot of women who, I agree with your point. A lot of women said, well, their options aren't great. But what did they consider to be a great option? Well, if it's a man who doesn't have a 4-year degree, but who has a job and is working every day, maybe not making as much as you, does that make him lesser of an option? And I think we have to hold some women responsible for their mindsets, and maybe their mindsets are driven by someone else. But
you just hold your thought. We got to continue with this, and we will, because it's too important. You just said something very key there that Charlie Kirk did not say, and that was some women. And that's the key. When you paint with a broad brush like this, which I know it's very easy to do, but the problem is you run into that soundbite now is taken out of context. It is going to be played all the time. It will be overlaid with Charlie Kirk standing at the political event with Donald Trump. And it'll be, there you go. This is Donald Trump and the Republicans, and this is what they think of women.
And then in their early 30s, they get really upset because they say, the boys don't want to date me anymore because they're not at their prime. And people get mad when I say that. Well, it's just true. If you're in your early 30s, I'm sorry. It's like you're not as attractive in the dating pool as you were in the early 20s.
Wow. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I understand the point he's trying to make. The question is, what's the solution here? And how do you articulate this and try to move our culture in another direction without sort of publicly shaming women who are in their 30s? I know so many women in their 30s who would love to get married, and it's not because they put off marriage or relationships. And so, what is, I mean, this is not something you fix overnight. We have moved in this direction in our culture. And part of the problem, by the way, is men. Because men in their 20s aren't looking. Why aren't we talking about how the fact that men in their 20s, for the most part, just want to goof around and have fun? And sadly, women in their 20s have allowed them to do that.
Well, then that brings into the conversation sex and the availability of sex on demand. And why from a male's perspective, will you marry a woman if you're getting all of the privileges of marriage, such as living together, sleeping together, buying property together, and living together? So, there are conversations about cultural changes that need to be had. I think encouraging our young men at young ages to be thinking about marriage, and young women at younger ages to be thinking about, in college, to be thinking about marriage and looking for suitable spouses. It is going to take some time. We can overcome it. And the older you get, we also think about where are we looking for men, and what are we looking for in men? And if we're looking for quality, that maybe that needs to trump some of the other must-haves that we thought are necessary, but maybe are not as important.
Charlie Kirk obviously getting some backlash against this and pushback. Some of it mindless. Hopefully, ours was not mindless. It should be noted that he started dating his first wife, when he was 31. She's a few years older than him. His wife, I believe, is 35 or 36 years old.
Yeah, exactly. She was in her 30s. So
they got married when she was in her. Yeah, I mean,
if you're in your early 30s, I'm sorry. It's like you're not as attractive in the dating pool.
Dude's going to get the worst pushback at home, I think. He better watch himself. Watch your back, Charlie. The call's coming from inside the house. It's 7:54.